This is the Mike LiPetri Show.
Lou Civello, second VP, Suffolk PBA. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well.
I'm excited to have you on. I wanted to talk a lot with the Suffolk PBA. You guys are monsters in the county of Suffolk and the island, frankly, of how you operate both for your members, law enforcement, you advocate, and also on top of it with being involved in the political issues as well as political campaigns. I think you guys have become titans in the sense of how you influence people, making sure that you have supporters of law enforcement and also protectors of communities. And I think that's something that's really vital to what we need nowadays. I mean, what have been your thoughts with what's been going on these past couple of years? I mean, your time with the Suffolk PBA. How long have you been with the Suffolk PBA now?
So I've been a member of the Suffolk PBA for over 20 years now, and I've been a union representative for about 15.
15, God bless you.
It's time flies, brother. Time flies.
Oh man, what's in the future for you? What's gonna be where you're looking at for where you're gonna be?
We'll see. Taking it day by day. I enjoy what I do. I love being a police officer, but I also love representing my brothers and sisters out there as their union advocate. And first and foremost, we are advocates for public safety and advocates for law enforcement to try to make this keep this a great place to live and to work.
I find it so interesting how the Suffolk PBA is so unique, where you have friends on local level on both sides of the aisle, and it used to be that on the state and federal. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what happened with that? What's been going on? Like, what have you been thoughts with what the policies have been happening that's changed this dynamic?
Yes, we used to sort of interact more on both sides of the aisle. I think over the last few years, police have been demonized, and that closed a lot of doors to law enforcement. There were a lot of decisions made where law enforcement wasn't at the table, and the results of that have been catastrophic.
Did you guys ever try to be at the table to discuss?
Absolutely.
You were rejected.
Absolutely. Yeah. Going back to a lot of the changes, the major changes that were made to public safety laws, going back, to 2020, to the George Floyd incident, where it was just, police officers are the enemy across the board, no matter what. This is not the work of an individual. This is systemic. It was the sort of narrative that they were preaching, and we were locked out. We were locked out of the conversation. And because of that, you saw this wave, especially here in New York State, of anti-public safety laws, starting with bail reform, and then many others, 50A, which was a law that protected police officers, our families, our private information. And since then, the results have been catastrophic, and sort of what gets lost in the conversation, and I think what you don't see, as you hear a lot of the rhetoric, is the victims. Bail reform has victims. Not victims just of the criminals, but victims of the law. People that lost their lives or lives were forever changed in many cases because of bail reform, because of these anti-police laws. And that's due largely to law enforcement not being at the table. Had we been there, I think some of the changes could have been made from a more common sense approach, where some of the goals, which the goals in many cases were good, could have been reached while still safeguarding victims and safeguarding the everyday citizen's rights to not be a victim.
Right, repeat offenses not taken into account at all either. I mean, that's something that's just absolutely ludicrous. So somebody that has the laundry list of crimes, and then now they commit another one, and it's just like, just let them right out. And I got no chance as a judge to even offer any sort of alternative choice. Right,
the revolving door of justice, where you have criminals committing the same crimes over and over again. In some cases,
so revolving door of injustice, essentially, right?
No, that's probably a better way to term it, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. They committing the same crimes, getting locked up, incredible frustration from the point of view of the police officer that's out there risking their lives to stop these people, and to see them put right back on the street. You totally get demoralized because of it, and like I said, there were real victims. We've done our best from the Suffolk County PBA to highlight the victims of this. I'll give you one, for instance, Tom Buckelman over in Blue Point, a plumber who was viciously beaten by a repeat offender, somebody that was only out because of bail reform.
Why?
Beaten within an inch of his life. Well, they've handcuffed, pardon the pun, they've handcuffed the good guys in this case, where even the judges, when we lock them up, don't have the ability to hold on to these people, even though they're violent recidivists. They have to put them right back on the street. And in those cases, they go out and do the same things over and over again. And in Tom's case, he was viciously beaten within an inch of his life. We posted pictures on our social media of him laying in his hospital bed, something that was completely preventable, if not for bail reform.
Was he an officer? Was he just a lay citizen?
Oh, Tom's a plumber.
Just a lay. That's what I mean.
A regular person, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, this is not even pertaining to police. This is to the regular working people of Suffolk County who expect to get up every day and go to work and be with their families and be safe. That's not an unreasonable expectation. Here's a guy in Blue Point is working in a building and there's a squatter in the building. And the squatter, like I said, only out because of bail reform, had been locked up previously many times before and was out free because of this law. And for whatever reason, he takes a disliking to Tom, who's just there trying to make a living and do his job, and comes out with a baseball bat and proceeds to beat Tom within an inch of his life. Didn't get a lot of media. It just gets a cursory passing from Newsday. Newsday has the habit of sort of obscuring these things. You don't see these sorts of stories in Newsday because they don't want to shine a light on it.
Does Newsday at all reach out to you guys, ask for comment, thoughts, anything?
Yeah, it's they reach out for us only when they're looking to put a negative spin on something, negative in terms of that they can make the PBA somehow look bad. I hate to say it, there is a total left slant at that paper. I've seen it again and again where they twist facts or only present one side of the facts. And it's sad because I think Long Islanders deserve the whole story, and it's not being presented when you have a monopoly. And that's quite frankly what Newsday is. It's the only large-scale news paper here on Long Island, and because they sort of have this monopoly, they can present things the way they want. So many times, they'll reach out to us on a story that might have a negative spin, but on something like Tom Buckelman, I can tell you right now, beaten within an inch of his life, the phone at the PBA never rang for a comment on that.
That's incredible. I mean, I think that's what people are getting so frustrated about is they want to see the both sides. They want to hear the story. They want to see the fact of what's occurring. I don't know why. What is the point of providing or misleading the public, not providing the facts of just what is and letting the public just decide, right? Wasn't that when did that occur? Like, where did that change? Where they wanted certain policies? What are your thoughts?
I'd say police reform is always a popular topic. If there is any profession that needs reform, it's journalism. Journalism has sunk to an all-time low in this country, I think. There is no more objective journalism. I think what we get is propaganda, from both sides of the aisle. They're interested in their own political agenda. They're interested in, lining their own pockets and, making things as salacious as they can to gain viewership and sell papers and gather followers. And the truth sometimes doesn't do that. The truth sometimes isn't the sexiest of thing or the thing that sells the most papers. And I think that is the motivation. And it needs to change in this country. We need to go back to a media that is divorced from having an agenda and having a media that objectively does its job in reporting.
I think you're seeing that more and more nowadays where alternative channels, news stations, podcasts, even online forums where people are just going to and retreating to try to get actual facts on what's happening in terms of just whether it be macro level, federal, or just even micro with local. I think is so pivotal, frankly. And now with you guys progressing, so now you have this friction between certain jurisdictions within the Democrat Party. But how is it locally within the Democrat Party and the Republican Party here?
Well, I tell you, locally we're very fortunate. Locally we have great electeds on both sides of the aisle, with a few exceptions. Specifically the 13th LD.
What's happening over there?
Well, we can get into that. That's a particularly unique individual. But getting back to your first question, right. We have great relationships on both sides of the aisle. I really truly feel that we have elected officials out here who public safety is a priority. I think we're a lot different than New York City. I think the Democratic Party here on Long Island is a lot different than New York City. I think we're fortunate in that sense that we don't have the fringe to the extent they do in New York City. I think we have electeds, like Errol Toulon, our sheriff, like Ray Tierney, our DA, like our county executive, Steve Ballone. Again, coming from both sides of the aisle, who really do care what it's like out here as far as public safety, and I think that shows, in the result.
What do you think has presented? We'll get to LD in a little bit at 13, but what do you think has presented to show that bipartisanship towards law enforcement? What has the Suffolk PBA done that maybe other PBAs across the state or country can emulate that allows you guys to work in that bipartisan fashion?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. I think it's a big part of it is being politically active. I think that's a huge part of what we do. And that's sort of what our friend there in the 13th Legislative District is trying to marginalize police officers and prevent police officers from participating in the political process. But I think having that voice at the table, knowing that police officers are out there and we do vote. We do have families here. Our kids do go to school here, and we have a stake in the community. I think that is incredibly important. And I think that is sort of what we do at Suffolk PBA to a really greater degree than maybe anywhere else in the state, where we're out there participating in the political process, making sure that electeds on both sides of the aisle know that we're going to be out there and vocal and voting and participating and making sure that a priority stays on both public safety and in how our law enforcement officers are treated.
Do you play in many campaigns across both local, state, and federal?
Yes, we do. We make endorsements across the board, and we go beyond the endorsement stage. We actively participate. We actively encourage our officers to get out there and vote. We make sure that we have an educated membership, so we are actively engaged in making sure that our members know the issues, to make sure that our members' family know the issues, make sure that they know the voting records of particular elected officials, so that you don't have egregious behavior not being held accountable for when it comes to elected officials.
How many members do you have at Suffolk PBA?
So if you take everyone into account, both our active members, our associate members, and our retired members, we have 5,000.
But what's going on now is LD 13. What's the situation?
Well, what I just saw at the legislative public safety meeting was an absolute disgrace. You have a legislator in the 13th legislative district here in Suffolk County, namely Rob Trotta, who has an obsession with the Suffolk County PBA. He has an obsession with marginalizing police officers. He has done everything in his power to, prevent police officers from having that voice that we just spoke about in the political process. And it's all mainly due to the fact that we, the PBA, and those police officers did not support him in his run for legislature. We have, in fact, never supported him since he has been a legislator. And he has seemingly taken that personally. And it has resulted in frequent outbursts, the latest one of which was really just surreal, where he took out a recording and threatened a sitting police commissioner. Basically, if the police commissioner didn't take some sort of action against his political opponents, namely the Suffolk County PBA, that he would, release this tape. He would play it at the meeting. I've really never seen anything like it. It was absolutely disgraceful, and really calls into question his ability to serve.
That's great. Was that in the papers?
Newsday ran a story on it. If you got to the very end, it spoke about the recording and his behavior. But you can go watch it. It's all on video.
Yeah, right.
And like I said, if you watch it, it's absolutely surreal. He's in the face of the other legislators. He actually drew condemnation from his own party members. Other legislators, Republican legislators, actually condemned his actions because he's...
And he's a Republican.
Oh, he's a Republican, yeah. And he's openly just trying to coerce and intimidate the police commissioner because he's not getting what he wants. He's made these baseless complaints over and over and over again. I'll give you what it would be analogous to, Mike. So it would be analogous is to me as a police officer if you telling me, Lou, write my ex-wife a summons, and if I don't acquiesce to your demands, you whip out a tape recorder and say, well, you remember what you were saying to me last night, at dinner? I taped it and I'm going to release it. That was the sort of thing that played. And who knows if the recording's even real or what it is. I mean,
right, but the threat alone.
Right, he seems unstable, but to openly, attempt to coerce a sitting public official, it was disgraceful, it was unethical, and unfortunately, it is par for the course for Legislator Trotter.
So what can you guys do to respond to that? I mean, isn't that important in terms of having your voice and your thoughts to what was said, or as simply just representatives of the law enforcement?
Well, I hope the public is paying attention. He is up for election this year. And certainly, we are going to be bringing it to the attention of the ethics board for the county, and we'll be bringing it to the attention, obviously, of the presiding officer. That something needs to be done as far as an investigation into his behavior. Now, this for Legislator Trotter, it's you can see as the vile and venom just sort of seeds out of him anytime the PBA is mentioned. It seems quite personal. Again, I can only imagine it's due to the fact that we have not supported him. But the party, as you see, his own party in this case, is condemning him. So it really doesn't have much to do with party. It has to do with the individual.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, and so many people nowadays, I mean, you're seeing it where it's become so partisan, this view of law enforcement, when, mind you, just a handful of years ago was, I mean, during the pandemic, I recall before all this, before George Floyd and all, I mean, I remember law enforcement being hailed as heroes with in terms of being out there during the pandemic when the coronavirus was pervasive throughout all the population. Law enforcement was still out there, right?
Right. Well, I will be the first to tell you, Mike, that the men and women out there in the Suffolk County Police Department are heroes. They're out there every day risking their lives. They're out there every day doing great work. If you go to our social media, the Suffolk PBA's Instagram or our Facebook, we do our best to highlight those great deeds that they do every day. We have officers out there delivering babies, officers out there actually diving into water and saving people.
Wasn't that just recent too?
Both of those things were recent.
Yeah,
the last couple of weeks, we had an officer make a save, diving in, risking his own life, and we had some babies delivered, and we had, like I said, you can see all this stuff on the social media. We do our best to highlight every single one of these things. But these things that these are the ones that sort of make the papers, or the ones. But there are just so many acts out there every day, even little acts of our highway guys changing tires, and officers go into those domestics at the most tumultuous of times of people's lives, and sort of playing referee and doing the great things that police officers do every day. They are out there doing those things, and I couldn't be more proud to represent our officers.
So what's some of your political priorities now going into 2023? We have the change in House of Representatives at the federal level, but state level, we have Kathy Hochul won her election for governor. We have state Democrats in the Senate, Assembly, both supermajorities. So how does Suffolk PBA work with them?
Right. Well, I can tell you, going forward, we haven't done any screenings. We haven't done anything of that nature so far. Right now, our main concern is just advocating for public safety. We'd like to see bail reform changed. We'd like to see judicial discretion restored. We'd like to see the 50A law amended to take out unfounded and unsubstantiated complaints, which are really nothing more than used to, without base, discredit police officers. We'd like to see some of the negative legislation that's sort of floating around out there, all these raise the age and laws that just let violent criminals walk out because they hit a certain age. We'd like to see those defeated. So we're out there advocating for what we think is best, both for our law enforcement officers and for the people of Suffolk County and New York State.
Can you talk more about the 50A? Because I think people understand the bail reform, but how does 50A affect the general public and law enforcement?
So 50A was a law that really protected police officers' private information, which is in a day and age where you can type a couple words, a name, or any kind of identifying information into Google and find out not only where I live, but you'll get a family tree of me, my kids, and everyone that I have a family relationship with. That was really important to us. In a knee-jerk reaction, I think, to the Floyd murder, they pulled that law. And what they did is they went so far as to say everything is now discoverable, even if you have unsubstantiated and unfounded complaints. So, for instance, if you have an active police officer, you're going to get complaints because you're out there doing your job, and many times your job entails holding people accountable for their actions. So if you're that person that's taking guns off the street, if you're that officer that's out there making drug arrests over and over, one of the tactics that the bad guys will use is to just constantly complain. Oh, he did this, he did that, and much of it is without any basis, and it goes through the investigatory process, and it's found to be completely baseless, especially now with body cam. A lot of these things we can completely disprove, never happened, but all those unfounded complaints are now discoverable. So all a defense attorney has to do is disregard the fact that the complaints are unsubstantiated or unfounded and say, well, this officer, you say this to a jury, this officer has 50 complaints, 100 complaints, 200 complaints, and it just undermines the officer's ability to do his job. It undermines the prosecution. There are other public laws, like the education law, similar to 50A, that weren't repealed. It was police officers were singled out for this, and that needs to change. It really is a hindrance to us doing our job. It's a hindrance to being able to prosecute violent offenders. And again, they went too far. They went, and I'm hoping that they go back and take a look at that law, and at the very least, call out those unsubstantiated, unfounded complaints, and hold those back from being discoverable. And if there are complaints that were founded complaints, then that's a horse of a different color.
In the education law, you see the similarities with 50A. Is there any other public, do other public employees, do they have similar protections? Yeah,
we find that a lot too, Mike. So I'll give you, for instance, what you probably hear the term qualified immunity a lot, right? And people think that this is this protection that only police officers receive. Qualified immunity is extended to all sorts of public sector workers, public officials. So teachers get qualified immunity. Judges get qualified immunity. Elected officials get qualified immunity. And the only ones they want to take it away from is police officers. So if I'm an elected official or I'm a teacher, I'm not making those split-second decisions that police officers make. So of all the groups that you could take this away from, they want to take it away from us, which is absolutely insane. And the only thing that qualified immunity actually affords you is if that you're doing your job, if you're acting within the scope of your employment, that you're not going to get sued personally. So can you imagine, with everything else that we have to face as police officers, split-second decisions, life or death decisions, that on top of getting shot myself, right, I have to worry about, am I going to get sued? Am I going to get sued? Even if I'm following my department's rules and guidelines, because somebody somewhere is going to Monday morning quarterback me as they sit in their nice temperature-controlled office drinking a cup of coffee and say, no, this officer could have did this. He could have shot, like our president, Joe Biden, just said, he could have shot him in the leg. Right? Like it's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. And then you have the highest office in the land saying these things, right? The president of the United States putting out something so ridiculous that while I'm being threatened, with a knife, which said 2 officers stabbed, right, multiple times. While I'm being stabbed, that I should somehow try to aim for the guy's left ankle, it's ludicrous.
I just think about it practically. So imagine qualified immunity stripped. So again, if a lawsuit, this is where someone who's a police officer acting in the scope of his or her duties, is then sued, any sort of damages, if any, will be paid after finding due process that the municipality will pay for said damages as opposed to the person for whatever reasons. But if you strip this, then what is it going to happen? You have individual officers have insurance then?
Right. They want to take away that immunity. So they want to not only be able to come after you and come after you departmentally from your rules and procedures, they want to be able to come after your house. So if you're that police officer that takes some sort of action, if like Joe Biden said, you didn't shoot him in the leg because he was trying to kill you or she was trying to kill you, and they deem that you acted inappropriately, they want to be able to sue you and take you home from you, which again is ludicrous.
So I'm just trying to think about the rollout of it if that actually occurs. I guess every officer then would have to get insurance. But then what person's going to sign up to be a police officer?
Right. Hopefully we'll never find out.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
because quite right. Who is going to sign up to be? And that exact scenario is playing itself out across the country, where they can't get people to be police officers. I think you probably just saw the article over in California. They want to allow illegal immigrants to take the job of police officer, which again, if your first act in the country is a criminal act coming in the country, and we're going to give you the job of enforcing the law, right? Like, I mean, we've hit the point of absolute lunacy.
It's quite a paradox there, but
Right.
California, I expect nothing
Right.
nothing less, frankly.
Right, you don't really get rational
Never rational. I mean,
laws.
that's what people are feeling, right? Like a loss of rational thinking with common sense, right? That's all anyone's looking for. I think both sides of the aisle, in terms of voters, they want that common sense approach where it's just rational thinking, being able to understand both sides of perspectives, right? I mean, I guess as an attorney, I always look at it as in the court of law, right? You have the plaintiff and defendant, prosecution, defendant, but there's always both sides are presented to the jury, and the jury makes their decision. So for me, that's how I look at it in the sense of politics today. What I think we need to reinstill, because going back, it's funny with the 50A talking about that. I recall looking at that history of 50A when it was implemented, and I believe it's from a Democrat governor, if I'm correct, that actually signed into law in New York State that 50A in order to protect officers from frivolous claims that are baseless, like you just said. So
Yeah.
I remember looking at that when that law was being promulgated, and the repeal, I should say. And I remember seeing that. I found that very ironic in that in how the difference is in terms of what was to what is. But many people, you think about when it used to be the Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan era, right? That Democrat, Republican deal making, same values, same end goals. I think we're allowing the lunacy almost to take over on both sides, frankly. Even, I mean, we saw in the House of Representatives with the Republicans taking it, you had that first week where it's just chaos. Now, I guess there has been negotiations on policy and all, but the same token, it's almost like first impression is the lasting impression. And I think people just want to see where it's more of that sit down, have the discussions, honor the word, honor the deal, and kind of move forward. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think exactly. I think we have the two extremes sort of running the country, and we're getting more and more polarized here. And we really need to come back to the middle. We need to remember that we're all Americans, right? This is one country under God, and I think we need to work together. And like you said, just some common sense. I mean, you need to look no further than New York City to see a total lack of common sense. You have Chase Bank right now saying we can no longer keep our ATMs open. We have to close ATMs, right? Chase Bank, multinational, right, corporation, JP Morgan, right? We have to close these ATMs because it's just not safe. It's just not safe for their ATMs, like, because of the vagrancy, the homeless, the crime, right? Like, so if it's not safe to keep an ATM open at night anymore, you know. I mean, so how did we get that far? You know, how did we get to that point? And you ask what we do differently here in Suffolk County. I can tell you, Chase is not closing ATMs here in Suffolk County, thankfully, but you know, these state laws affect all of us, right? So, you know, Long Island's not its own state, Suffolk's not its own state. So when they pass these laws, which you see the effect, you know, so quickly because New York City is so extreme, and the local electeds there embrace it so much, you know. But inevitably, these things do affect us here, and we need to just come back to something normal. You know, we need to come back to you know, making it safe to walk down the streets, you know, both here in New York City. I'm sure you, like I grew up in Queens, used to love going to Manhattan, and I wouldn't bring my family to Manhattan right now. You know, I wouldn't consider it. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of transplants from New York City? Like, has that affected the transplants from New York City to Suffolk County? Those who have moved specifically during really after this pandemic, has that affected in terms of officers, what they're seeing and witnessing in sense of have they been getting any objections from people, or people moving from the city out to Suffolk County want that safety? They want that feeling of security. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think a lot of people did move out here during COVID, and I was hopeful that they wouldn't bring their politics with them, and we would, you know, retain the character of Long Island, of Suffolk County, because it is such a great place. And the whole reason that you leave New York City is because you don't like what you get there. So when you flee, whether it be to Long Island, or you're fleeing to North Carolina, or you're fleeing to Florida, you know, I think you should leave your politics where they are. As for the cop on the street, yeah, there was a change. You had a lot of groups, people sometimes not even based here in Long Island, that were coming out here and protesting and wanting to change the way that we police, and making demands that were unreasonable. You know, demands like, well, you shouldn't do traffic stops anymore because all traffic stops are racist. Again, things that are going to make us less safe. Well, if we're not going to do traffic stops, who's out there pulling over the people that are driving while they're intoxicated?
Right.
That's a lot of where the guns and drugs that we stop those crimes from happening, that person from being killed, or that fentanyl getting to your son or daughter from those traffic stops. But there were groups, like I said, that categorically wanted us to stop. We shouldn't enforce the traffic law anymore. We should have some sort of civilian, unit that does that. Demands that didn't make any sense, were unreasonable, and again, coming from outside the island.
What you're speaking about the fentanyl in traffic stops. Have you seen an influx of fentanyl over the years?
Oh, yeah.
Have your officers? What have they been saying about that?
Oh, certainly. We actually had an officer who was hospitalized because they touched just a tiny little bit of it on one of their calls. So yeah, it certainly has.
What do you mean? Can you elaborate on that?
So yeah, your skin is porous. And
right.
If you touch it and it gets in through your skin, it can have a negative effect. It doesn't take much to actually kill you. And we had an officer where that exact scenario happened. Thankfully, they're okay. But we had that exact scenario. So yeah, we're certainly, anecdotally hearing from the officers, it has been increasing, continues to increase. It probably has a lot to do with our porous border, our lax criminal laws here in New York State,
right.
where, the penalties just aren't stiff enough, and people know that you're not going to be held accountable. So all those factors combined makes this place ripe for the taking. It's ripe for the drug cartels to push their poison and send it to your kids.
Yeah, I remember seeing a video of an officer, or maybe a photo of an officer who I think was giving mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to a person who then, I think they ingested fentanyl. They were overdosing, and then that officer was then overdosing. Like, they had to go to the hospital. So that wasn't just like a one. See, I think so many people don't realize that wasn't just a one-time, like a rare occurrence, anomaly. That was something that you've seen, you've even heard personally.
Oh yeah, like I said, we had an officer hospitalized. It's just another added level of danger that the officers out there face every day, and our medics, and everyone that deals in this space. And now what I'm hearing now is that there are versions or things mixed in the fentanyl that Narcan won't have an effect on. So that Narcan, where you have that one opportunity to save the person's life, is going to be less and less effective.
That's insane. Actually, immunity to the Narcan.
Right.
So
right. Whatever they're cooking up in these drug labs, is showing some resistance in some cases.
Is it specific drugs that's laced in fentanyl that you're seeing more common, or is it anything? Like, is there certain types of drugs that's more the fentanyl is laced with, or is it just fentanyl straight up? Like, what is this drug?
Yeah, we're just seeing an increase across the board with fentanyl. Obviously the heroin, the whole
part of heroin.
Right. Yeah, the whole opioid epidemic, which created the demand for this. Going back to.
I'm just thinking, would it be in marijuana? Would it be in cocaine? Would it be meth?
You could have it. Right. It depends. You could have it laced in marijuana. You see it across the board, and there's a demand. There's a demand going back to the whole opioid epidemic, which certainly is not over. We talk about COVID being not being over. Well, we should talk about the opioid epidemic not being over, because we still get kids dying with needles in their arms. So it's and this demand was created by Big Pharma, and hopefully they get held accountable.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, Big Pharma, that's a whole separate animal with what's going on, just from rolling out with different, whether it be the vaccine. I mean, COVID vaccine has created so much controversy among the populace, and then you have on top of it other prescriptions, and then from even the history, Big Pharma, I feel like, is one of the biggest problems. Also, what people aren't talking about too, I think, is big food. Big food and Big Pharma are going to be big dilemmas, no pun intended, with in our future in the next decade, really.
Yeah, certainly. And it just goes back to everybody being held accountable for their actions and for justice to be applied equally. You have the oxy epidemic that's created by these companies. If you kill one person, you're going to jail. They killed millions. Right. And who's held accountable? We'll get some fines. We'll get a bankruptcy. It's very unfortunate how the system, works. That sometimes these bigger crimes aren't held accountable.
I remember in the assembly, that just reminded me of the accountability problem I remember I sponsored death by dealer statute, which made it the DA can prosecute a dealer for murder when the drug they dealt causes the person to die from it when they overdose on it. If you could show that causal connection, then you could prosecute them for murder.
Right.
I thought that was going to be like a brilliant way, like what you just said about how I think that was actually great legislation from a Democrat friend of mine in the Assembly. He pushed that, and that was an awesome piece of legislation that unfortunately hasn't gone anywhere. But
Right. Well, the children of Democrats die the same way from opioids that the children of Republicans do. So I think that's a great example of a common sense measure that crossed party lines and
remember,
worked together.
And you have to prove it in a court of law, so you still have the same burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Sure.
But nevertheless, I think that would strike so much fear in the heart of so many dealers to deter them. Like, listen, if I get caught with this, for example, that these drugs now laced with fentanyl, we're in trouble.
Right. There is no deterrence now. I mean, you look at the legalized marijuana. I don't know how you feel about it, Mike, but you can't drive 10 feet down the street without smelling it. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
You know.
My big thing was there's no test.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so when I remember getting that legislation in the Assembly, and I was just like, how do I test for it? DWI is 0.08. I know, this is why I used to talk to so many people that are pro marijuana for legalization. I used to say two things. One was DWI is a 0.08 test, and how do I know with someone who is under the influence besides signs, right? But that was one. And number two is the people that you're going to tax the hell out of it, and the person that's already been using marijuana for years is going to go to the same person because they're fine with it. So how do we even make that where it's useful after going through all these hoops, where then people would be ingesting that as opposed to just what they're used to? So those two the testing was never answered. So we didn't even get to stage 2 because the testing was never answered for me. Right. That was my biggest concern.
Well, I can tell you the way we enforce it now is with our drug recognition experts. So they go through a series of training that allows them to see the signs of you being high, and it is an arduous piece of training, and it costs a lot of money. So we don't have enough of them. It's Albany, as you know, Mike, serving as you did in the Assembly, has this nasty habit of forcing these unfunded mandates on the entire state. So you go ahead and say, well, marijuana is legal now. Well, where's the money for the drug recognition experts, right? Like, where's the money for us to make sure that somebody's not driving high as a kite and out there, smashing into your family?
And that was the biggest issue is that when you promulgate a state law, you have to think about how it's going to affect the masses, 20 million, because so many people. I know people who smoke weed and they're fine with it, and they're like, I would never do that. I'm like, yeah, but you're a respectful person. Mm-hmm. There are people out there that then ingest it, and then we'll go out in their car and drive around, and then what happens? Sure.
It's like alcohol, right? Like alcohol's legal, but you shouldn't get behind a wheel.
Right.
And there are laws in place. There's DWI teams. There's funding. There's grants for us to enforce that. The marijuana statutes, when you change them, should have come with the same funding for local municipalities, for local police to be able to enforce those laws. And quite frankly, I think it's a quality of life issue. You drive around, like I said, whether you're in your home or you're in your car, the smell is everywhere. It is pervasive. And I think we almost have more stringent rules for smoking now than we do for marijuana. You can't smoke within 50 feet of a county building, or you're getting some kind of fine. Again, you come to Long Island for it to be a nice place to live, and quality of life is so important. I think we saw that in New York City when you stop enforcing those little things, when you stop enforcing the marijuana laws, when you stop enforcing the turnstile jumping, that broken windows. Well, those things, as you let it go, they fester and get worse. And then you're not stopping those big crimes early on, sort of nipping them in the bud. They have basically stacked the deck against law enforcement. They have done everything they can to make it better and easier to be a criminal, and they have made it more difficult for law enforcement, both on the officer's side and on the prosecutorial side, to do our jobs. Like I said, I know I can tell you from speaking with the DA's office that they are overburdened. The discovery laws have really just been a total crippling factor when it comes to successfully prosecuting criminals. And again, it's a place where our elected officials need to act. I think you've had Albany just especially in the case of judicial discretion, here you have two totally separate branches of government, right? Our judicial branch and our legislative branch, and you have one, just crippling the other. So it really is an issue of separation of powers. They completely took away judges' ability to do their job and help keep violent offenders behind bars. And again, that needs to change.
Where does the Suffolk PBA go from here? Where do you go in terms of advocating for legislatively? If you're not going to have a seated table, are you going to have a seated table? Like, how do you progress?
Well, I think we keep doing what we've been doing. We're open to having dialogue with both sides of the aisle. I think we supported Lee Zeldin in that last election, and Lee is the absolute best. Unfortunately, the outcome there wasn't what we would have liked it to been. That being said, we're willing to work with a new governor. I know just a few days ago she spoke and supported not repealing qualified immunity for police officers. So that was a very positive change.
That's huge.
Oh, it was absolutely, and credit where credit's due. That was absolutely necessary. I'm very happy that she did that. So we're open to working with both sides of the aisle. We're open to common sense changes when it comes to police. We participated in the police reform here in Suffolk County, and we had a voice at the table, and I think that's why what came out of it, got some changes done and maybe addressed some of the concerns of the public out there, but at the same time didn't cripple us as far as public safety and the ability to do our job. Body cameras, being a great example of that.
Yeah, body cameras have done wonders actually for law enforcement, because it's like 98, 99, like 90, high 90% of officers with body cameras, they have any of those charges or allegations found to be just completely rebutted.
Sure. And I think ultimately they're doing exactly what we knew they would do, and that's show the great work that our officers do every single day. Great tool. I would just say at the same time, it's like, in any walk of life, no matter if you work in an office or if you're a teacher, do you want a camera trained on you all day long?
Yeah.
Do you want it every time you call your family? Do you want that on camera? Do you want every single little thing you do on camera? So again, they are a great tool, and I think ultimately they will be a good thing for our officers, but at the same time, it's just another level of responsibility, another level of things, police officer scrutiny that police officers have to deal with. So these jobs are becoming more and more complicated, more and more, scrutinized. And if you make the slightest mistake, trust me, there will be a line of people, starting with the Newsday reporters to Monday morning quarterback you.
Well, Lou, it's been an absolute pleasure, my friend. Thank you very much for shedding a light on what you do, what the PBA does, and frankly, standing up for officers and keeping the community safe. So thanks, man.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me.